Hello folks, my name's Tim, and today in this video I want to explain the universal plan to you. It's a theory of everything that is compatible with idealism and information realism, i.e. that everything's made of information. It is a totally different approach to understanding the universe. It is new to the modern era, but I believe it was discovered before in the distant past, and there is evidence of it still remaining in various places like mythology and religion and alchemy. These things may sound like pseudoscience to you, of course, but the UP is actually based entirely on observation and reason, and therefore I would argue that it is science. It can be observed and figured out by anybody at any time. The facts are all there already. The only thing that people have missed is to actually think them through. And being probably a bit autistic, that's what I did. So the UP, the Universal Plan, unifies all subjects, all intellectual pursuits, all sciences, philosophy, maths, logic, and religions. It is a truly universal theory of everything. It is a grand unifying theory because it unifies all topics under one system. And it does this by fully defining the thing that they all have in common, which is information. All thought, all theories, all intellectual pursuits are made of information. And the UP works by explaining how information works. So the UP sits above all other theories and ideas. It provides an absolute objective method to judge their validity. It is the master key to the universe. And even if the universe is not made of information, information is still the only way that we can understand anything. So the theory still applies in that more limited scope. It enables us to understand how we conceptualize things and what we can and can't know, which is epistemology. It provides absolute objective definitions for all fundamental concepts and categories of stuff that exist, and that's ontology. It's a complete map of all of the most fundamental data types that exist and their rules and relations. It's an exposition of the core principles of natural law, and it includes all of the basic laws of nature and explains them. Unlike other theories of everything, it's relevant not just to physics, but literally everything, including religion, politics, emotion, beauty, desire, life, death, afterlife, any topic that you can conceive of. The TOE is relevant to it. And it solves the problems that we have in the world with philosophy and science and so on simply by defining terms properly. Because definition is the same thing as understanding. If we can define these terms properly, then the mysteries essentially evaporate and things become very clear. And the reason why we don't understand things properly in the modern world is because we haven't defined our terms properly. It's basically as simple as that. And as I mentioned, the UP is derived purely from observation and reason. It doesn't draw on any third-party sources or opinions. It's not syncretism. I haven't mixed and matched a whole load of ideas from other people. I literally threw all the books in the bin and started from scratch with the most basic things that I could observe, and then tried to figure out how things work from that. So the UP has already achieved quite a lot. I mean, I'm only one guy working on it on my own, and I'm not the fastest car on the racetrack. I'm not stupid, but there's plenty of people out there far more intelligent than me, and we'd make a lot more progress if I got some collaboration going on. So I am completely open to that. So there's a number of new theories that are derived from the UP that I've written about in my book. The books are available for free from my website, and I'll link it in below. So the list of achievements so far include a new theory of information and language, universal structure for all types of language. What this means in practice is I've been able to unify human and computer languages into a single schema. So I've been able to show that human languages and computer languages do actually share the same structure. It leads to a computational theory of mind. The mind in the UP is defined as a qualia processor. So it's basically the same as a computer, but the computers that we use work on quantities. They are quantitative processors, whereas the mind is a qualia processor. It operates on qualia. which is just fundamentally a different data type. That's all it is. The UP leads to a unified ether model of physics. Obviously, the ether theories are kind of out of the window these days, but it suggests that this is the only way that we can build a fully coherent picture of physics. Although the theory is somewhat tentative and immature, as I said, there's only me working on it. I do have a basic model of matter and a basic model of charge, but it needs a lot more work, to be honest. But what it does do is it unifies the concepts of light, energy, and matter. It offers an explanation of the origin and structure of physical matter. And really that's where physics needs to start. It needs to start with defining what matter is at its most basic level. And of course this hasn't actually been done yet in modern physics, but the UP does do that. It offers a new theory of entropy and order. You might think we don't really need a new theory of entropy, but this actually leads to a single principle which can account for all physical structure in the universe and even the origin of biological life. So by redefining entropy and order according to the rules of the UP, we're actually able to fairly easily explain where biological life comes from and why things have structure, why the particles have a particular fixed form. The UP has laid out a new theory of colour and colour vision. So currently it's thought that our eyes work on RGB, a bit like a video camera, using the three primaries of red, green and blue. However, some of the data doesn't quite match that. The sensitivities of the cones in the eye don't really match up with that theory. There's an anomaly in there. And the UP suggests that actually we have a four primary colour model of the eye, and it explains those anomalies. So it may or may not be correct, but at least it does imply that it can explain the data better. It gives us a new theory of the senses. It redefines what a sense is. It says there are only four fundamental physical senses, but we also have internal senses, and those essentially constitute mind. So mind is a collection of senses. It offers a new theory of categories, which is philosophy, ontology. The question of what the most basic categories of stuff that exists are has been a long-standing question in philosophy, and the UP provides a definitive ontology of fundamental categories. It answers that question completely. It explains what morality is. So a new theory of morality. It's very simple and it's natural. So it doesn't require a god. It just requires the facts of nature. And the specific fact of nature is the fact that sometimes we need to cooperate with other people. Social creatures exist, and morality is essentially a law of social structure. It offers a new theory of free will and a full definition of the principles of choice. A new perspective on time. So time comes in two forms. It says things like, there cannot be a beginning of time. That's actually not logically possible. Time cannot begin. But what can begin is the measurement of time. So time and the measurement thereof are essentially two different forms of time. It offers a new understanding of space and time, in which time is the dual opposite of space. So it does essentially say that the Einstein's conception of 4D space-time isn't quite there. Time is not another dimension of space. It can be treated as such, but that's not really the correct way to define it. And it offers a new, better way to define it, essentially. It unifies science and religion, so it's a systematic demystification of non-physical phenomena. It's an essentially anti-mystical theory. There is no room for mystery in this theory. It essentially says that the entire universe and everything can be understood by humans. There is nothing that exists that we cannot understand that will forever remain a mystery. So it essentially eliminates mysticism completely. And because it's a theory of definitions, essentially, it provides vastly improved definition for crucial concepts like logic, information, and infinity. People get tied up in all kinds of knots because they because we don't have good definitions for these concepts. Infinity is a really good example. There are lots of examples of infinity, such as Hilbert's Hotel, which are essentially invalid concepts, or malformed ideas. Basically, we've used the concepts incorrectly to formulate the idea, therefore the idea doesn't really make sense. So Hilbert's Hotel is essentially a flawed concept, a malformed idea, and that's why it's so full of paradoxes. I actually believe that the UP is the original Philosopher's Stone. So this is the real one. It's not, as is popularly imagined, some kind of substance that you add to a vat of boiling lead to turn it into gold. It's not that at all. Philosophers don't work with matter. Philosophers work with ideas. So the Philosopher's Stone is going to be made of ideas. It makes a lot more sense. Philosophers don't, they're not chasing money. They're not materialistic. They want truth. The goal of a philosopher is to find truth, and so that's what the UP provides. It provides a master key, a means to find truth. And it is a rediscovery, as I later realised, of alchemy from first principles. So alchemy is not, as it is popularly imagined, it's not essentially chemistry, it's not a physical science, it is a spiritual science. And finally, I believe that it produces a complete logical proof of God. Although the God it actually defines is not like any of the modern religions. So it proves God, but God is not exactly as imagined. It is essentially clarifying idealism, in the sense that if everything's made of information, then it must reside in a mind. Or the mind could be natural or it could be artificial, essentially. So if everything's made of information, it either resides in a mind that is natural or one that is artificial. So this universe exists within a mind, but it could be a machine that was created by people, even. And indeed, I would suggest that this universe was created by people and not directly by God, the original God. I know that will be highly controversial, but we'll get there. So now I'm going to explain where the theory comes from, where it's going roughly, and what the differences are between the UP and most other theories of everything. The UP is a very different worldview from any other, profoundly different, but its core premises are not really that radical in the context of modern science. It says that the universe is made of information, that information is made of concepts, and that duality is fundamental. But, quantum mechanics implies a universe that is defined by mathematical relationships and probabilities. It is somewhere in between materialism and idealism. It's somewhat compatible with both of those worldviews. And today, some physicists do argue for information realism, which is that the universe is made of information, and structural realism, which could also be called relationship realism, and which means that relationships are what is real and fundamental. The UP agrees with both of those statements. The modern paradigm of science is materialism, essentially. So most of the theories of everything out there are physical theories of everything that deal only with matter. The UP is based on idealism, it's information based, and so it deals with all phenomena, not just matter. Materialism says the universe is made of matter, that some form of matter is fundamental, and it kind of leads to ideas like the cyclic bang crunch universe or the steady state universe, essentially that matter is eternal. The UP says that the universe is made of information, that some forms of information are fundamental, information is made of concepts, and it essentially says that spirit is eternal. So matter is not eternal, but spirit is. Where spirit essentially just means things which are non-physical. Idealism in general says that the universe is made of non-physical things, and so that is what the UP holds as a premise. In materialism, the substrate of the universe is the quantum vacuum or quantum foam, and matter is a function of that quantum realm. The UP says that the substrate is consciousness, So everything's ultimately made of consciousness, and that information is a subdivision of consciousness. So essentially, consciousness is everything, but if you zoom in on a particular bit of consciousness, that's how you get information or concept. Materialism says that concepts are created by people and they are subjective and relative. It essentially says that concepts only exist in the minds of humans. Whereas the UP says that concepts are fundamental, they're objective and absolute, and they actually reside in the mind that holds the universe. We can call it God. I guess that is actually the definition of a God, is the thing that contains the universe, so I guess that'll do. In materialism, theories of everything assume the existence of maths and logic, whereas the UP explains the existence of maths and logic. It says where they come from and how they develop. Physical theories of everything that assume maths and logic can't really be called theories of everything if they cannot explain those things. So it's a bit of a misnomer for many of them. Modern science suggests that the universe may be incomprehensible. It suggests that we may never be able to understand everything. So it may be incompletable. It may just be something that's local to us, and there are aspects of the universe which are beyond our understanding. And it also suggests that there may be some things in reality that exist that are paradoxes and are beyond human understanding. The UP, on the other hand, says that the universe must be comprehensible. It's made of concepts, our minds work with concepts, therefore there's no reason why we can't understand everything. It says that science is universal and it is completable. We can understand everything. And that paradox cannot exist in reality, which is actually a very powerful tool for analysis. If anything contains paradoxes, then it is by definition wrong. It cannot exist. In the materialist paradigm, all science is done bottom up, from observation of material phenomena. We have an observation and we try and figure out the rules that led to it. But the UP says science can be done from the top down too. So we can observe non-physical phenomena, the UP, which is a set of rules. It's like a map of the foundation of the universe. And then once we have those rules, we can then work top down to figure out what we should observe. And these two methodologies can actually work together and meet in the middle. And having the UP, the set of rules that we can then derive the universe from, it means that science should be a lot easier to do and a lot simpler, take a lot less time and be a lot clearer. It's a bit like, when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle. With materialism, you're trying to put the jigsaw together, but you've got no idea what the finished picture should look like. But with the UP, that gives you the finished picture. So when you come to assemble your jigsaw, you know what it should look like. In materialism, consciousness is not necessary. It is somewhat inexplicable, and it is considered by many to be an epiphenomenon, something that arises secondarily from the behaviour of matter. And also that consciousness potentially has no causal power, so it's something of an illusion to us. The UP says that consciousness is necessary and fundamental, that it does have causal power, and hence that humans have at least some degree of free will. The debate about consciousness is often termed the hard problem of consciousness. There's a philosopher called David Chalmers who came up with the idea of philosophical zombies. He says, even if we solve all functional questions, this is a paraphrase, by the way, he didn't say this directly. Even if we solve all functional questions, it doesn't explain why there is a subjective experience at all. This remains unsolved and leads some to dualism, panpsychism, and idealism. And yet we are going there. We are going to dualism and idealism, although not exactly, although I suppose panpsychism too, but perhaps a different form of it. So in materialism, there's no reason why we should actually have awareness or self-awareness. But in the UP, it explains why we do have those properties. David Chalmers basically argued that it is conceivable that biological life forms could act without having consciousness. We could just have a set of predetermined rules and things that we just use, and we just go about life in a kind of and we go around in an unconscious way, just producing stuff according to a set of rules, but we don't need to be aware of any of those things. And modern AIs are a really good example of this philosophical zombies type thing. So AIs appear to be at least sort of somewhat sentient or thinking, but they're not, are they? I mean, they're essentially a kind of fancy database. And databases are not conscious. AIs are not conscious. They have the appearance of it, but they're not actually conscious. Really, instead of being called artificial intelligence, they really ought to be called simulated intelligence, in my opinion. The materialist paradigm tends to hold that brains create consciousness, that consciousness arises from brains, perhaps by emergence or complexity. Although in the book I argue that that's actually not possible, that those concepts themselves are misunderstood and wrongly defined. Essentially, it says that consciousness derives from matter. The UP says the opposite, that consciousness creates brains and matter derives from consciousness. So matter is information, it's made of information, and it's held within a mind. So in this view, the universe is something like a simulation. In fact, the UP predicts that all possible realities are some form of simulation. There is no reality in which matter can be fundamental. It's not conceivably possible. And finally, materialism tends to go towards the B theory of time, the block universe, mainly because of Einstein's relativity. And in that view, the future is fixed. Whereas the UP says that the universe is an iterative process. It leans towards the A theory of time, where time does actually flow and the future is not defined until it happens. It's undetermined and unknown. The future doesn't exist until we get there. In fact, the future never exists, does it really? The only thing that does exist is the present. And we'll get into how that's defined shortly. This diagram shows the whole of the UP. This is the whole thing. There's nothing more to it. It's very, very simple. It is, I would argue, the most parsimonious explanation for reality, not only that exists, but that is conceivably possible. It consists of 10 concepts, which are also could be described as categories or super concepts. These are extremely broad, fundamental concepts that everything is made from, and there's only 10 of them. This diagram shows how they evolve and how they are related to each other. Although there's a heck of a lot of information actually within this diagram. Basically the whole universe. You can derive the whole of reality from this diagram. That's the idea. So the whole of science can be derived from these principles, from this map. This is the top-down approach I was talking about a moment ago. Although how it actually works, that's a little complicated. We'll have to get into that, possibly not in this video though. So I'm just showing you this now so that you've got a bit of an idea about where we're going. At the very top, we have the one category, and that contains all unitary concepts. And below that, we have duality. We have yin and yang, which are the two halves of duality. Now, I know that the terminology I've used here, yin and yang, and indeed the four elements below, it's going to put a lot of people off. I understand that. But really, these are the best terms to use. They're basically already perfect, so I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. Although it obviously does leave the theory open to misinterpretation, because a lot of people think that they understand these concepts already, whereas, with all due respect, they probably don't. So if you can possibly put aside any ideas about these concepts that you've already got, just for one moment while we're going through this, and try and understand them in the context that they are intended. So I'm going to define these things in a way that nobody else has done. So this is new. Duality really is the starting point, because, well, that's where I started in trying to understand things. I just started trying to understand duality, and it led to this diagram. So the concept of duality, which is woefully misunderstood in the world in general, actually leads directly to this theory of everything if you just think about it and work through its rules. And as I was saying earlier, there's no syncretism, there's no borrowing of other people's ideas here. This is all purely worked out from observation of these ideas and how they function. It shows a hierarchy of specificity. So the one concept contains the most generalized concepts that exist. It includes the idea of everything. So everything is obviously the most generalized concept that exists because it includes everything. Whereas at the bottom, we actually have the three operators, and they're the most specific of all of these concepts. And this is the way the universe develops. It develops from the most generalized concepts to more specific and detailed ones as we descend the hierarchy. There are many ways to read this diagram depending on context. So for now, we won't go into too much detail. It's just to give you a rough picture of where we're going. You can separate this diagram into two halves. We've got the top three elements or principles, Yin, Yang, and Yin. These are the simplest ideas that exist. I should say, actually, there is a distinction between concepts and ideas, and I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably, which is a little bit naughty. Concepts are the fundamental things, and ideas are collections or arrangements of concepts. So really, I should be a little bit more precise with my language, but maybe it doesn't matter at this stage. So the top three principles can actually be defined or categorized as Yang, and the lower 7 can be categorized as Yin, heaven and earth. If you look on the left, we have the three operators, voice, heart, and sex. These correspond to the three Boolean operators, not, or, and these are the mechanisms which transform one principle to another. So these are the transformations. It says that there are only 3 fundamental mechanisms in reality, and everything is made from those, or via those rather. So one becomes duality via the application of the not operator. The not operator is also called the reflection operator, and it corresponds to the voice principle. I'll explain why these are allocated to voice, heart, and sex in a moment. Just bear with me. So to get yin and yang from one, we use the not operator. To get the 4 elements from duality, we use the heart operator, the or, Boolean or the alternation operator, as it's called. And to get from the 4 elements to the 3 operators, we use the sex operator, which is the Boolean and it's combination and mixing. That's what it does. The sex operator actually corresponds to all forms of creation. So whenever we create anything, we're actually taking a number of things and putting them together. We are combining them. That's what creation is. As a trivial example, consider a painting. It's a combination of canvas and paint. So we have the 3 operators shown on the left and they show how to transform from one principle into another. On the right hand side, we have the 4 elements, and they categorize the level. So the one concept principle, so the one category is classified as fire, duality is classified as air, the 4 elements classify themselves as water, and the 3 operators are classified as earth. There is a whole load of meaning behind this. I mean, it obviously won't mean probably anything to you at the moment. There's a huge amount of information backing this up, but it's a process that we'll have to go through to try and explain all of these different elements bit by bit. So just so you understand, if you overlay the 4 elements over the human body, they appear in the same order. There is a particular order that they come in. Actually, there's 2, but this is the main one. Fire, air, water, and earth. They appear in that order, and this is how they appear in the human body too. So if the UP and the 4 elements, for example, are real, then we should be able to observe them in reality, in the order that they appear in the UP, and we do. So traditionally, the 4 elements are associated often with the states of matter. Fire is plasma, air is gas, water is liquid, earth is solid, of course. And The brain works on electricity, so that is our fire organ. The lungs obviously work on air. The gut works on water, and the earth works with matter. The earth, the feet, the limbs work with matter. And in between those major organs, we have the three organs shown on the right. We have the voice, the heart, and the sex operators. And these are mixtures of the elements above and below. So voice is a mixture of fire and air, heart is a mixture of air and water, and sex is a mixture of water and earth. Now all the elements have other meanings. So fire means desire, or that's one of the concepts that category contains, and air means law, or contains the concept of law. So when we speak, we are essentially bringing our will into law. We are making our will law. So when I say something like, "I'd like a cup of tea, please," I am expressing my will into the air as my desire, or as a command, as a law. So whoever offered me a drink now knows what I want. The heart is a mixture of air and water, and the heart pumps blood around the body, and water is essentially a mixture of air and water. It's aerated water. There are a lot more correspondences than the ones I'm going into here. This is just a very brief overview. And in between water and earth, we have sex, the creation principle. Although, to be fair, we could argue that all of these operators are creation centers. We create law with our voice, we create action with our heart, and we create new objects with sex. And going back to the UP diagram just for a moment, I want to demonstrate why I believe that this is the origin of alchemy. Because these 10 principles are echoed in alchemy diagrams in the same order, in the same structure, as I will show you now. So I came across this diagram from alchemy, and it essentially shows exactly the same structure. The 4 elements are named the same, but everything else is named something else. But it does concur with the UP. I mean, specifically, the prima materia is the one category. It is consciousness, and it is the prima materia. It is the thing that everything is ultimately made of. So this is what made me realise that I'd actually rediscovered alchemy from first principles. So, as I said earlier, duality is really the key to get into all of this. It's the gateway that you go through that opens up and reveals all of this information. You just have to understand duality. And it is not understood in the modern world at all, as far as I can tell, by anybody. Apart from me and you now. So humans have invented many new concepts during our existence, such as the idea of a cheese sandwich. But they're all built on a foundational level of concepts that the universe itself is built from. Concepts are the components of information, just as words are the components of language. Information is made of concepts. And our minds work with concepts. So if our minds work with concepts and the universe is made of concepts, then that's why we can understand it. It explains the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics and why the universe operates using logic. Because minds operate using logic. That is essentially the only tool in the box for a mind is logic. So that's why the universe operates according to logical principles, because it is the function of a mind, the product of a mind. So as I said before, the concept of duality is the gateway that leads to the theory of everything. And by understanding it, that's how we can understand everything. The premise of the theory is that the universe is made of concepts and information. And an observation that we can make is that some concepts are more fundamental than others and more generalized, such as the concept of duality. The concept of distance, near and far, depends on the concept of duality. It couldn't exist unless duality existed. So this implies that there must be a hierarchy of concepts, as the UP diagram shows. The concept of duality definitely exists. All the fundamental properties we use to describe things depend on it. It is extremely generalized. And so, back when I was investigating this stuff, I thought, yep, this is a pretty good candidate for investigation. And that's why I did so. We should bear in mind that dualities are relationships. Yin and yang are relative to each other. So this is compatible with that concept of structural realism, which I talked about earlier. It does essentially say that everything's made of duality, which is relationship. Everything's made of relationships. Now, yin and yang are essentially the most... I'm sorry, I keep saying essentially, don't I? It's one of my little things. Please forgive me. Yin and yang are the most fundamental, broadest, and most useful descriptors that exist. When we're talking about relationships, we pretty much always need to use the terms yin and yang to describe the two parts of the relationship. There is no other term which suffices, which will do the job. And so the fact that the Western world lacks these concepts is a huge impediment to understanding. It means that some things, relationships, cannot be described without it. And I would assert that the absence of the concepts of yin and yang in Western thought has been the greatest obstacle to understanding, period. Most of the problems in society are down to people thinking crazy thoughts, and they think those crazy thoughts because they don't understand duality. As an example, let's consider Darwin's theory of natural selection. Darwin essentially focused on competition as being the driver of evolution. It is the need to compete against other individuals and species that define how we evolve. But competition or conflict is one half of a duality. The other half is cooperation. But because Darwin didn't understand that competition is half of a duality, he didn't consider the other half. And cooperation is in fact the yang part of the duality, which therefore means it's actually the most important one. So the thing that really drives natural selection is cooperation, and competition is secondary or even somewhat illusory. In many cases where we think competition exists, it doesn't. Where we think things are being done for conflict purposes, they're actually being done for cooperative purposes. And the absence of cooperation in Darwin's theory actually is a major omission and has resulted in much confusion and missed opportunities. So, how do we understand duality? Well, the best way is to build a table of dualities. We have one category, which is the yin category, and we have the yang category. And then we just take a bunch of dualities and we figure out which category the two halves should go in. So if we start out with the concept of many and one, which is quantity, then we find that many goes in the yin category and one goes in the yang category. So how do we figure this stuff out? Well, while we have an obvious correlation between the two concepts in a duality, obviously many and one, they form a duality, and so we have a horizontal correspondence here. But, and this is the thing that most people miss about duality, is there is also vertical correspondence. So all of the dualities that we put into our table refer to each other and elaborate on each other and explain each other in more detail. So, for example, many is divided. It's made of discrete things. Matter is many things. Matter is passive. Matter is an illusion. As I said before, everything's made of consciousness. Matter is made of information. So matter is something of an illusion. So we have the yin and yang categories, but the description of the duality as a whole belongs in the one category. So when we're dealing with many and one, the descriptor for that duality is quantity. So that goes in the one category. That's how we allocate or categorize these concepts. Quantity and quality is another important duality. We could refer to this as data type. Divided, unified, far and near, that's obviously distance. You can read through this table as we're going, obviously. I'm not going to go through every single pair. I really just want to highlight the fact that the concepts in each column are related and they describe each other. So let's start here. The duality on this line is consciousness and experience. So what it's saying is that consciousness and experience is a duality. This is something that's not generally recognized in the modern world, but it's kind of obvious when you think about it. Consciousness is a single, unified thing. It's one, it's unified, it's near because it's right in the middle of you, it is you. It's continuous, it's spirit, it's not physical, it's active, it does things, it's true because it really exists, and it's independent, and it's absolute, and it is the cause of things. Consciousness is the creator. It is light in some various ways. Also, it is potential. So yang is potential, yin is actual. So matter is actual, consciousness is potential. Consciousness is inside. It is the observer. It is me. I am consciousness. Experience is outside. It's what is observed. It is me in the universe. It is the in the universe part of my basic experience. The most fundamental observation that anyone can make is that I exist. We experience our own existence directly. We don't have to use any of our physical senses to do so. We are self-aware. We know that we exist. It is the one thing that we can know 100% for certain without any doubt. The second thing we can know is that we experience the universe, or the world around us. But we can't be sure that that exists. This could be a simulation. We could be playing some kind of complicated computer game. So we experience the universe, but we can't be certain it exists. So it is potentially an illusion, a fiction. Also, obviously, experience is many. We have many experiences. Our one consciousness has many experiences. So hopefully you can see how these concepts begin to correlate together. And when you do so, you find more descriptors to explain the thing that you're trying to understand. So if we want to understand consciousness, we can look at all of the properties in the yang category, and it will tell us what consciousness is like. If we want to understand matter, then we look in the yin category, and we can correlate it with all of these things. Now, some of the ideas, they don't necessarily mesh together perfectly. Matter is an effect. Well, to be fair, that's okay. But these are all context sensitive. A lot of dualities are context sensitive, and they may not seem to mesh together perfectly. But if we broaden the definition of what we're looking at somewhat, then they do tend to go together. And this table is incredibly useful for understanding concepts. I cannot overstate how crucial it is to understand this relationship, and how by understanding it we can solve some of the most difficult problems in philosophy in general simply by correlating ideas. I mentioned earlier the idea of Hilbert's hotel when dealing with infinity. So we have infinite, and that belongs in the yang category. So we can look at the other properties of yang to determine what infinity really is. And the most important one is continuous. An infinity is a continuum. Only a continuum is capable of being infinite. A continuum is something that can be infinitely divided. But when you divide a continuum, you end up with two discrete things. So the first time you divide it, you'll end up with two discrete things. However many times you divide a continuum, you will always end up with a finite number of discrete objects. And we find that the concept of discrete correlates with the concept of finite. So what this is saying essentially is that the only true form of infinity is a continuum, and discrete things are always finite. So with Hilbert's hotel, which is a hotel with supposedly an infinite number of rooms, the problem with this idea is that you can never have an infinite number of discrete objects, such as hotel rooms. So Hilbert's hotel is a malformed idea. It's basically impossible right from the beginning. It's a paradox. You cannot have an infinite number of hotel rooms. It's simply impossible. But because people don't understand duality and how this stuff works, it has taken and wasted so many years, or whole lifetimes. People's whole lifetimes have been wasted chasing ideas that simply do not make sense. People are still talking about Hilbert's Hotel and treating it as if it is a rational, well-formed idea, but it is not. It's a paradox, because he is essentially committing a category error, because you can't have an infinite number of discrete objects. It's conceptually impossible. One final duality I'd like to cover is that of symbol and archetype. This is kind of important because of ideas like Plato's forms. I want to draw a distinction between the UP's treatment of archetypes and Plato's, because he again committed a category error in his definition of them. Plato's forms are described as being the perfect representation or the perfect version of a thing. So Plato's form for a dog would be a perfect dog, the most perfect dog you can imagine. But that's not the same as the UP's conception of an archetype. In the UP, an archetype is a very broad category. So it includes all dogs. It's not a perfect dog. It would include the concept of a perfect dog, potentially. But I'm not even sure that the idea of a perfect dog is really a valid idea, because all matter is imperfect. So in Plato's forms, his archetypes were the perfect version of something, whereas in the UP, it's a very broad category which includes all of those things, including the worst possible inversion of a dog that you could imagine. So in the UP, archetype and symbol forms a duality. The archetype is what comes first, and the symbol is something that represents the archetype. The archetype is the input, the symbol is the output. The archetype is a template, the symbol is an instance of that template. And just so we're clear, all of the SI units that are used by physics are dualities. They are one-dimensional relationships. All dualities are one-dimensional relationships between two opposites. So distance is measured in meters, and the duality it refers to is near and far. Time is the past and the future. Temperature is hot and cold. Mass is heavy and light. Current is slow and fast. I'll explain why in a later video. A mole is a lot or a little, and a candela is dark or light. So all SI units are dualities. So whether people realize it or not, duality is embedded deep into the heart of physics. And so to understand physics, we really need to understand duality, right? So to finish off the video, I'm just going to try and go through the process that I employed to discover the UP. As I said, I started out with duality because it's kind of an obvious place to start. It obviously exists. So the table that I just showed you, the duality table, that's really where I started, by building tables of dualities and seeing what happened, basically. But it became obvious fairly quickly that duality can't be the most fundamental concept, because duality is the number 2. And the number 2, it can't be fundamental, because the number 2 by definition is 2 ones. So it implies in itself that it isn't fundamental. There must be a unity concept that it derives from. So that's how we discover the 1 category. To get to the 4 elements, well, we have to bear in mind that, this is a process of creating the universe. So we started out with 1, it became duality via the not operator, reflection. But then how does it go from there? How do we go from duality to the next level? Well, if all you've got essentially is duality to work with, then the only thing you can do is to create a duality of dualities. And that's what the 4 elements is. So we're basically applying duality to itself, and that creates the 4 elements. Again, I reiterate, there's a heck of a lot of stuff behind this that I'm not able to get into in this video to back it up. You're just going to have to take my word for it at this stage. or read the book, which does explain it all in nauseating autistic detail. And the final layer, the three operators, as I think I said before, these are mixtures of the elements above. And they were discovered by looking at the layout of the body, as I showed you, and realizing that we have these organs in between the ones which the four elements allocate to. And when we look at those organs, the voice, the heart, and the genitals, we find that they are perfect mixtures of the elements that they are in between. So it's all kind of fairly obvious when you look at it. So that is the whole UP. I hope I've covered most of the basics in enough detail to sort of give you an idea what it's about. There's one final thing to say that's very important that will help you understand how it actually progresses from this stage, and that is that this structure is nestable. So it can work like a fractal, essentially. If we look into any of the lower categories, what we can do is we can overlay this entire map onto it. So let's say we're looking at the fire principle. We can now put this entire map beginning at 1 on the fire principle. So fire then becomes 1 in this map, and then fire has its own yin and yang, and fire has its own 4 elements, and so on. And you can do it again. You can do it up to potentially an arbitrary number of levels. So the way that you get more detail is to nest this structure. So 1 becomes the fire category, or fire becomes the 1 category, and then it has its own yin yang, and so on. I hope that makes sense. Another thing that's perhaps worth mentioning at this stage is the 4 elements appear in a specific order, in the order that we see here, and in the human body: fire, air, water, and earth. But it can also appear in another format, and that corresponds to cyclic activity. So circles, the sine wave, the seasons, all of these things are also made of the 4 elements, but in a different order. As far as I can tell, the 4 elements only appear in these 2 orders, and they are or can be categorized as yin and yang. So there is a yang ordering and a yin ordering of the 4 elements. The one we're looking at here can be described as form. So this defines form. The FAWE sequence of the 4 elements defines form, and everything that has form appears in this order. And this is actually the yin version of the 4 elements. The yang version is that cyclic process. In that, the elements appear in the order FAEW, and I will explain that in a future video. So the yang order corresponds to the concept of function. So the one on the page here, FAWE, is form, whereas the FAEW version is function. So all forms correspond to the FAWE ordering, and all functions correspond to the FAEW ordering. Okay, I guess that will do for today. It's probably already quite a long video. I will get into more detail in future videos. So thank you very much. If you've made it all the way through the video, I really appreciate that. Appreciate the audience. And if you don't hate it too much, maybe you could give me a like and subscribe. This really is, in my opinion, the most important information that exists in the world today. It may sound a bit arrogant, but I'm not saying this out of arrogance. I genuinely believe that this is the thing that the world is missing. I mean, for example, we all want to live in a moral society, but philosophers and theists have had 2,000 years plus to define what morality is, and they have failed. There is no good definition of it in the world today, but the UP is able to provide that. And if we want to live in a moral society, we have to at least begin with defining what that means. If we can't define it, we're never going to get it. And it explains a lot of other things too, like politics. So, it's not just about matter, it's about the entire experience of being alive. This clarifies every aspect of reality. And without it, we simply will not be able to make the world the place it should be, or that we would like it to be. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.